Welcome back, everybody. Today we will finish up our lesson on rhombus, rectangle, and square, and we will focus in today on the square. A square is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Which means, in other words, that a square is the combination of a rhombus and a rectangle. So if you put a rhombus and a rectangle together, you get a square. So the square corollary, so logically following this previous statement, a quadrilateral is a square if and only if it is both a rhombus and a rectangle. Which means that every property of a parallelogram, a rhombus, and a rectangle all will apply to a square. So ABCD here is a square if and only if all 4 sides are congruent and all 4 angles are right angles. So now we're thinking in terms of a rhombus, RSTV, and I'll draw that, RSTV. Is it always, sometimes, or never true that angle S is congruent to angle V? And for a rhombus, I'm going to say that is always true because in a rhombus, opposite angles are congruent. How about angle T is congruent to angle V? Is it always, sometimes, or never true that these two angles, T and V, would be congruent? And for this one, I'm going to go with sometimes. Okay, so these consecutive angles here in a rhombus would have to add up to 180. So I would say it is only true if rhombus RSTV happens to be a square. Okay, so a square is a rhombus that has 4 right angles. So T and V would only be congruent if they happen to be right angles. So for any square, CDEF, is it always, sometimes, or never true that CD and DE are congruent to each other? And for that, I don't even need a sketch. I will say that is always true because in a square, all sides are congruent. You have 4 congruent sides. All right, now we are going to use what we know about different quadrilaterals to classify this quadrilateral right here. It could be a parallelogram, it could be a rhombus, a rectangle, a square, or it could just be a basic quadrilateral with none of the properties of any of those. Okay, so now this one happens to have 4 congruent sides, but it does not have right angles. So I would say this is a rhombus because it has 4 congruent sides and no right angles. A quadrilateral has 4 congruent sides and 4 congruent angles. Classify it. So if it has 4 congruent sides, it's going to look like that. So it's a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides, and it has 4 congruent angles. Now, a quadrilateral is 360 degrees total. If we distribute those evenly between the 4 angles, it's going to give us 90 degrees each. Okay, so this has to be a square because it has 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. find the value of x and y. Okay, so I would have to classify this as a square because it has 4 congruent sides and it has a right angle here. So 4 congruent sides makes it a rhombus. In a rhombus, opposite angles are congruent and consecutive angles are supplementary. 90 and 90 makes 180. So we're looking at a square. We're not asked to classify it, but it is a square. Find the values of x and y. So because these are congruent, I know these are equal lengths. So 5x minus 4 is equal to 3x. So I can subtract 5x from both sides. So negative 4 equals negative 2x. And divide by negative 2, and I get x is 2. And then for the y's, these are congruent. So 5y plus 1 is equal to 2y plus 4. I can subtract 2y, and I can subtract 1, and I get 3y equals 3. And I can divide by 3 and get y equals 1. Okay, now on this figure we are going to find each angle measure and we'll find the length of every segment. Okay, so I have 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So this is a square. Okay, now a square has every property of a rhombus, of a rectangle, and of a parallelogram. As a rhombus, it has 4 right angles inside here. As a rectangle, I know that all of these are congruent, so I've got 5s on all of these. Okay, now as a rhombus, diagonals bisect opposite angles, which means that all of these angles end up being congruent. They're all 45 degrees. Okay, so the angles here are bisected, and because we have 4 isosceles triangles, we know that these base angles are all equal in measure, so they're all going to be 45 degrees. Now the only thing remaining is these sides around the outside. And what I have is 45, 45, 90 triangles, which are in the ratio of 1, 1, square root of 2. So that means 5 is to 1 as DG is to the square root of 2. And I can multiply across and get DG equals 5 root 2. So around the outside, every side is 5 times the square root of 2. Now I have 4 quadrilaterals here, and I want to classify each of them. They could be rhombus, rectangle, square, parallelogram, or just a basic quadrilateral that doesn't meet the qualifications for any of those. So here I have 4 congruent sides. The angles look like right angles, but I'm not quite sure that they are. So the only thing I can guarantee is 4 congruent sides. This is a rhombus. Here I have 4 congruent sides, and I have a right angle here. Okay, 4 congruent sides makes it a rhombus. A rhombus is a type of parallelogram, which means opposite angles are congruent. And it means consecutive angles are supplementary, so 90 and 90 makes 180, and that means there's another 90 over here. 4 right angles, 4 congruent sides. This is a square. Okay, here I have right angles across from each other. That's all I know. I don't know if all the sides are the same. I don't know if all of the angles are right angles. In fact, I could change these angle measures without violating the given information of these 2 right angles, and this same figure could be changed to look more like this, where there's still a right angle right here. So that right angle just moved over to here. This is definitely not a square, and it's not a rhombus. All I can say is this is some type of quadrilateral. It does not meet all of the qualifications for rhombus, rectangle, square, or a parallelogram. Here I've got 2 congruent sides and 2 right angles. That's really not enough to tell me much about anything. In fact, without violating any of the given information, I could extend this side up a little bit to exaggerate. So this is not a rhombus, rectangle, square, or parallelogram. It is just a basic 4-sided figure. It is a quadrilateral.